Hi, and welcome to another episode of EPMS Tech Talk. I'm Joanne LaFlamme, and I have with me here today Chris Costa. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Joanne. How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Good, good.
Well, what can I help you with today?
Well, I have a few questions on setting certain defaults in order entry, maybe a template.
Okay, I can show you that right here. Let's click on Estimating Order Entry. And now if you want to set a default template in Estimating Order Entry, you can either be in Work in Process or in Estimates, it doesn't matter. And you would click on the Add button as if you were adding a new estimate or order. And then you would come over to the Component area and click Add Again. You would select your component type and click OK. And this will bring in any default template that's already there.
Okay.
We would suggest when you're creating a default template that you put in a quantity of at least one, so you have a quantity in the template. And then anything else that you want to set by default, you can set at this time in here. What most people would do is want to at least set up their default markups. And you would click on the markup button and come in here and set your default markups. Now, say for example, in my template, I want to have a production markup of 25%, a material markup of 20%, and a stock markup of 20%. I enter my percentages, and if I want the same percentage for all quantities under each one, I would just come under each column and click the same button, and it copies it down for me, and then close. Now I've set my markups.
Okay.
Now you can also go into the layout and paper page and set up any, maybe you want to by default have a one-sided black and white copy. You could set default sizes. Maybe I want my default sizes to be 8.5 by 11, and I'm going to copy that down by clicking on that X button there. And I could bring in a default paper if I wanted to. I could also come over to processes, and maybe I have a pre-press process that I always want to bring in for every estimate or order.
Right, right.
Or maybe I only have one digital press and I want to bring that press in every time. I could do that.
Right.
In this case, I'm not going to. I'm going to just leave what I've got so far. And now I'm going to save my default template by clicking on the template button at the bottom of the screen. And when this screen opens up, all you have to do is go over to the template type and choose default template.
Okay.
The system will automatically know what type of component it is. This is a copying component, and it will set the ID to be copying-default, so I don't have to change anything there. And I can just hit OK, and it will save the template.
Okay. Perfect.
Now when I want to use it, I'm going to cancel all the way out, and I'm going to click Add as if I'm adding my component for the first time. I'll click OK to add a digital component, and it brings in my defaults, my quantity of 1, my markups, and when I go over to the Layout Ink and Paper page, it has the defaults I set up here.
Excellent. Okay.
Now you will have to set up separate templates for each component type. So you can just go into Add and do the same thing again for each of the component types you want to set a default template for.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Okay. Now, I didn't see you go into the outside services screen. There's a couple things I would want to default, for every outside service. Can we assign those as well?
Sure. Let's go into Add, and I'll start with say a digital component. You would go over to the Processes tab, select Outside Services, and click Add Again. Now there's only a couple things you can set by default here, but markup being one of them. Maybe I'll change mine to maybe 35%. The other thing you can change is your cost grid method. Maybe I want that to be per each by default. And the last thing you can change is the run spoilage table. If you want to bring one in by default, you can select one that you have here.
Okay.
And then you would just click on the Save Default button. And now I can cancel out of this, and if I go to add an outside service again, I have the changes that I made here by default.
Okay, that makes sense. Perfect.
Okay.
Are there any other areas in the program where something similar would exist? So, like the Save Defaults?
There actually is several places where you would set a default. You'll either see a Save Default button or you'll see a Set Default button.
Okay.
For example, if you add a component, you'll see one here where you can make any component type be the default component. Mine is digital. Maybe now I want it to be Flexo. I highlight it and I click on Save Default. So then if I cancel out and I go back in, it's now Flexo by default.
Okay.
All right.
That's good.
A couple of other places. Let's get all the way out here. When I copy, say, an estimate or an order, You'll have certain checkboxes here that you have access to, and that's dependent on how you've set up your standards and what option you've given users.
Right, right.
But now whether they're checked or not, you can save by default. So say I don't want those checked anymore. I would uncheck them and click on the Save Defaults button. Now let me just proceed out of here and cancel. When I then go to copy again, by default, those options are no longer checked.
Okay.
Now that's going to be the same thing on a copy of an estimate or an order, on the convert to an estimate or an order, on the revise.
Okay.
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 Those types of save defaults options are global too. So if one person changes it, it's changed for everybody.
All right. Okay.
Okay. Do you have any other questions for me?
One other. What about saving like the due date for a job? You know, how can I set the parameters for how many days out the job would be due?
It's an excellent question. You would do that under File Maintenance. So you're going to click on File Maintenance, come up to File and System Settings. And then you'll go to the System Options tab. And here's where there's a few more defaults to set up. This top one here, number of days to default due date, is where you'd set however many days to your default due date. So if the order comes in October 1st and your default due date is 5 days, it will be due October 6th.
Right. Okay.
There's a number of days to RFQ default due date, and that's for our .NET RFQ module. You can also set your ink default coverage, and that would be the number of square inches a pound of ink would cover. And that 335,000 is pretty much an industry standard.
Okay.
But if for some reason most of your inks are something other than that, you can change it here.
All right.
And again, this is just a default, so on the ink, any individual ink, you can change it.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, your vertical bleed size and your horizontal bleed size, you can enter a default there, and that's what will come into an estimate or order by default.
Okay.
And while we're here, the last thing I just would like to mention is here's where you set your reports location. So this is where Enterprise is going to look for the report files it needs to print a report out of Enterprise. It's critical to understand that that is a global setting. So if it's changed by a user, it's going to change it for all users.
For everybody. Okay.
Okay. All right, I think that's everything under here. Do you have any other questions?
No, I think that's actually very helpful. Very
Well,
good.
thank you very much, Chris.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of EPMS Tech Talk. I'm Joanne LaFlamme. I'm here with Chris Costa. Please stay tuned for more to come.